Think about a time that someone betrayed you or hurt you, someone that you really cared about even. Did you get an apology? And if you were lucky enough to get an apology, was it enough? Why or why not? What did you need to just get over what had happened to you? Now think about a time that you betrayed someone else or you hurt someone else, in particular someone that you cared about. Did you apologize for what you did? And how did your apology help them? More importantly, perhaps, how did your apology benefit yourself? These questions are at the core of a concept known as restorative justice. So this video is going to cover what restorative justice is, how it works, and what the thinking behind it is. Okay, and then it will end with a quick discussion of why it should work. That is the theory that underlies the restorative justice process. So what is restorative justice? Well, restorative justice is an approach that emphasizes bringing everybody together and repairing the harms caused by the offender's actions. Okay, it's a very inclusive process. It involves reconciliation and forgiveness. So it involves the offender apologizing for what they did and the victim having the opportunity to forgive them. The purpose is to discuss the crime and the harm it caused. So think about a victim impact statement, only one that's interactive, one that involves the offender. Okay, and while discussing what the harms that it caused, it also involves discussing what can be done to make things right. So it's intended to address the victim's needs. So this is very victim oriented. What can the offender and the community do to help the victim? Okay, it also addresses the needs of the offender and the community as well. So recall that crime and becoming a crime victim in particular can be very isolating. Right? People feel very stigmatized by their experience as a victim and oftentimes feel as a social outcast. Okay, they feel like people can't understand them, and if anything, they just pity them. So the purpose of restorative justice is to kind of eliminate that isolation. So various forms of restorative justice include mediation, conferencing, circles, victim assistance, restitution, community service, anything that can be done by the offender to make things right with the victim and the community. Some of you may have had peer mediation in school. I know I did. So when we were in like fourth or fifth grade, there was another student that was a peer mediator, and they would sit down with two people that were amidst conflict and help them talk that out. If you're familiar with that, that is very similar to what some forms of restorative justice look like. So there are four principles of restorative justice, or four principles of restorative practices. The first is that we require that we work together to restore the harm. We restore those who've been injured. So maybe it's the direct victim, right? Maybe it was somebody that had their house vandalized. Okay, so this would involve taking steps to repair the vandalism, repair the damage caused. This also could include, let's say it was a business that had been vandalized. So this could be making an effort to repair the business, okay? Or let's say the business lost customers as a result of that vandalism. So the restorative justice practices could involve taking steps to increase business and increase the number of customers that are frequenting that business. Okay, the next is that all of those that are directly involved can participate if they so choose. Sorry, my dogs are going crazy, y'all. So this may mean that this includes the offender, the victim. This could include business owners. This could include family members of the victim. This could include family members of the offender. Okay, it's the government's role to preserve a just public order and the community's role to maintain the peace. So in other words, it's the government's role to put rules in place, but it's the community's role to keep the peace amongst each other. So in other words, the restorative justice shifts a lot of the responsibility to the people. Okay, so there are four values of restorative justice. So these are not to be confused with the principles that we just covered. Okay, the first principle is encounter. So make sure you know these, star these, highlight these, whatever. These are important, okay? So encounter refers to creating an opportunity for those to encounter each other, for everybody that was involved in the crime to come together. So everybody that was impacted can come together and address the crime and its consequences. Okay, the second value is amends, and this is the idea that the offender has the opportunity to make amends, to repair the harm that they caused. The third value is reintegration. So remember how I said victims can be very isolated. Well, so can offenders, right? Both offenders and victims end up extremely cast aside, or at least feeling like as such after a crime occurs. And so the goal for restorative justice is, instead of further isolating the victims and offenders, to find a way to bring them back into the community. And the final is inclusion. And this is the idea that you're including all those that were involved, okay? All those that have a stake in the crime. So this includes community leaders. This includes family members, as I already discussed, right? This is everybody that could have a stake in what occurred, right? And they're at least given the opportunity. They don't have to. It's their choice to participate, but they have the opportunity to. So one form of restorative justice is victim-offender mediation. And this involves the victims and their family members. So in other words, the victim and, if they would like, have their family members to support, and the offender come together and they sit down together and they discuss what happened, right? And as I mentioned with the peer mediators in school, there's a mediator that is completely independent from the criminal justice system and has no affiliation with the offender or the victim. And they sit down and they kind of help the victim and offender navigate what happened and what can be done now. This can occur in face-to-face exchanges, but this also can occur in writing. So let's say you're the victim of a crime and you agree to participate in restorative justice practice. Then you could write a letter saying, this is what happens, this is how it affected me, and you would give that letter to the mediator, and the mediator would then give that to the offender, and the offender could write back, and so on. Okay, another form is restorative conferencing. So as you see in that picture here, right, it has the offender, the victim, and the community are all together kind of conferencing about what happened and what can be done. So it's a very structured meeting. This involves the offender's family as well as the victim's families. And the goal here is, remember, to be inclusive, to be reintegrative. And so we don't want the offender to feel attacked. So if it's the victim and their family, the community, and the offender by themselves, oftentimes it's not very constructive. The goal is to figure out how to best mend the harms caused. And remember, the goal is that the citizens build and maintain the peace. So this encourages the citizens to resolve their own problems and kind of handle it outside of the criminal justice system. And as I already noted, right, includes the power, or it addresses that power imbalance between the victim and offender by including additional community members. Prior to, or without the community members, there certainly is a strong power imbalance, right, where the offender typically has harmed the victim in a severe enough way that they have a significant amount of power over that victim. So the goal by including the community is to not only be integrative, but to kind of eliminate that power imbalance and to lift the victim up so they don't feel so on their own and so low. So what's the thinking behind restorative justice? Okay, why should this work? Well, it emphasizes repairing the harms to people and their relationships rather than only punishing. Okay, and it's meant to give the victims answers to questions. Think about the questions I asked at the very start of this video. Think about a time that you were hurt by somebody you really cared about, right? 9 times out of 10, one of the first things in your mind is, how could they do something like that? Why would they do that to me? What did I do to deserve that, right? And this kind of gives the victim the opportunity to get answers to those questions. Now, it's important to note that restorative justice is not intended to replace the criminal justice system. Rather, it operates alongside of it. So they will still have their own, court case, and they will still get a sentence through the criminal justice system. Okay, that operates in addition to this restorative justice track as well. Okay, so why should it work? Okay, as you see in this picture here, right, I took 4 sticks of butter from a grocery bag, ate 2, smeared the 3rd on the couch, and mom is still searching for the 4th. Okay, this concept is called reintegrative shaming, and we're going to get to this a little later, but I know that picture catches your attention, so I figured I'd address it right off the bat. Okay, so one of the reasons why it should work is because we typically understand offenders as being morally disengaged. What that means is they're not buying into it anymore. They don't care what the law is. They don't care what the morality of society and their community is, because they feel very brushed aside. They feel like society's given up on them, and that why should I feed into these rules when they're not benefiting me? Okay, the goal is to create this concept of cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance refers to this idea of what you feel is right is different than what you think is right, or when you have some misalignment between what you want to do and what you are doing. Okay, and it can make people quite uncomfortable. So there's a great movie that I love. It's called Boondock Saints. I don't know if anybody's ever seen it, but there is an FBI agent in there that discovers these two men are essentially seeking vigilante justice, and so they're killing, mob bosses and drug dealers and other people that are, causing a lot of harm to the city. And the FBI agent realizes who they are and what they're doing, and he experiences this great inner turmoil of, should I help these guys eliminate the bad guys, or are they bad guys? And that conflict he's feeling is cognitive dissonance. If you haven't seen that movie, can't recommend it enough. It's called Boondock Saints. Anyways, so the other goal of restorative justice and why it should work is that you're trying to build their morality and their social norms. You're trying to build some sort of relationship with the community so that they don't want to go against it anymore. Okay. I'm not sure what material says there. I'm sorry, that's a typo. It should just say emotional moral healing, okay? And reparations, right? If you're familiar with that word, reparations are efforts to make things right? So you may have heard about reparations in the context of paying money back, to pay reparations. But the idea of restorative justice is that it's more symbolic reparation, right? So the offender is taking accountability for what they did and trying to do something to make it better. And by doing so, they become more invested in the community and the well-being of society. Okay, and the final reason that it should work is called reintegrative shaming. And that's what this picture is, right? So reintegrative shaming is this balance between shaming the offender for what they did wrong and, and making them take accountability for it, but then reintegrating them back into the community to make them feel as though they still belong. So this dog here is experiencing reintegrative shaming. So yes, okay, so to better break it down, right? The first piece is that you're shaming them. You're identifying the behavior as shameful, and you're saying this behavior is unacceptable and will not be tolerated. Okay, but you're not saying this person is unacceptable and will not be tolerated, just their behavior. And by doing so, then you're bringing them back into the community to try to restore their dignity and trying to rebuild their investment in the community. And that's critical for ensuring that they don't continue crime, right? So just a few other little pictures of reintegrative shaming that always make me chuckle. Here's this cat down here that ate his mom's 10-page thesis paper right before it was due, and this cat that ate a bunch of catnip, right? So the idea here obviously is not the same with offenders because these cats aren't getting reintegrated to society, but this is the idea, right? And then one final piece of, I cut treats in half and try to pass them off as whole treats, right? And so these dogs are saying, right, display your shame for the world to see, right? But then they're still going to love him, and he's still going to be their human, and they're going to be reintegrated, right? So he's taking responsibility for what he did, but then he's coming back into his family. And that is the premise of restorative justice.